Well, when I first read this text, when we were talking about it, I looked at it and I was struck, as I was in the other story of the Good Samaritan, that Jesus at the well with the Samaritan woman was speaking to her in a way that it seemed that a Jewish person probably wouldn't speak to a Samaritan woman, because Samaritans were not, they were perhaps derided by the Jewish people. They were not highly thought of anyway. They were outcasts. And so he was speaking to her, and they had this wonderful conversation, and he ended up talking to her about offering her the water of life, and that she would never be thirsty again, which was a very extravagant generosity that happened in that story. And it just made me think about what that must have felt like to her, to have that, given her status in life, to have Jesus speak to her in that way. And it reminded me of the time when, many years ago, when I felt like an outcast, in that as I came to understand my sexual orientation and realized that it was not mainstream, and that there were people who would reject me or not like me or whatever because of it, and I felt like an outcast. And I was going to a different church at the time and talked to the pastor there, who told me that being gay was all right to be gay, but not to act on it. And so I didn't stay in that church. In fact, I left the church altogether for a time. And it was during that period of time I went to a Metropolitan Community Church in Milwaukee one day for a worship service, and that's a gay church. And it was so powerful to be in a church where I felt completely myself. And so it was kind of a joyful experience, but then also sad, because there wasn't any place like that in Madison until I found Orchard Ridge. And so coming here was like coming home. And the acceptance and the affirmation, the fact that I could be a spiritual person and bring all of me to that experience in community with others, was just so very powerful for me. And I think probably was maybe one of the happiest moments was 3 years ago when we were married in this congregation, and my children and my grandchildren were here to see that we are accepted and part of this community of faith, because they hear other messages in other places. And so I just feel that with Orchard Ridge, I've just received the same kind of radical generosity that the Samaritan woman received from Jesus at the well. And I'm very joyful and grateful for that.
This story spoke to me on a few different levels. I was really intrigued with the conversation that Jesus has with this woman, and how with each question and each response, they just go deeper and deeper. It's almost like they're volleying in this conversation. And I really like how that goes. I like that feeling of how they both seem to know that they're seen, and they're understanding that they see one another, and they're allowing themselves to be seen. It's like this intersection of courage and vulnerability that I just find really intriguing, especially given the status of the woman. So I love that feeling, and I love the idea of having those people in our lives that I like to say, people who remind us of who we are, people who really see us. So I love it on that level. And then I love the idea of the woman going back to her village and proclaiming without a doubt that the Messiah is here, and knowing that, and just that deep, deep faith, and that deep, deep grace and love that she seemed to feel. And courage, again, to just proclaim it. And I love the idea that somewhere in between there, between their conversation and between her making this announcement to her village, that there's this kind of this gray area in there that is almost like when you take a leap of faith and you can't, there are really not words to describe it. It's just this lovely mystery that was in between. So all of those pieces to me make this just a really powerful, powerful story.
When I was young and raised as I was in the Lutheran Church, original sin was part of our theology. And so it's just been a gradual revelation, I guess, over time, listening to other people and listening to people here in this congregation, and also some other books I've read, that I've come to a different understanding and of original blessing, of being born with original blessing, with a divine connection to God that is there. God is there in my birthing and in my living as an original blessing. And I read a wonderful book, Christ of the Celts, which really articulates that quite well. And it was one of those things that when I read it, I thought, I knew this somehow. I knew this. I always knew this. And I think of what a different way that it feels to think of all of us as part of original blessing, that God's Spirit dwells in each of us in that sort of pure place. And so whoever we are and however we might be different or however we might view each other, if we can remember that there is original blessing everywhere, in everyone.
Well, and above all of our connections with one another, we're so loved. I just, it kind of goes off of that, and I feel like we are all so loved. And so your idea of, or you're talking about original blessing really strikes a chord with me, because I think that's so true. Well, and in the story, he names the fact that she's not married, that she's, he names her situation that in a lot of cases would be ridiculed. And he names it with love. He uses love. And so right there, that intersection, it's like, I see you and I love you. And I know you and I love you.